Great. Let us know when it's fully up and then I'll start. Great. Hi. Hello, everyone. Welcome back after the summer. So just a couple of housekeeping points. Just a reminder that the meeting is being live streamed on our YouTube channel. Please, could you keep your cameras on where possible and your mics off where possible, i.e. where you're not speaking. Can we use the chat for meeting admin only? In other words, if you're leaving the meeting, etc., because questions should be asked verbally so that everyone has access to them via the YouTube channel because the people can't see the chat. And please, can you use the raise hand function when you want to speak where possible so I can bring you in? Everyone happy? Great. So I'm going to hand over to Alice to read out the apologies and substitutions, if there are any.
There's no apologies.
Excellent. Thank you, Alice. So I'm going to ask now for declarations of interest. Does anybody have any? Excellent. Moving on. So I've got a sad chair's announcement to make. So as many of you will know, sadly, this is Alice's last climate and environment panel because she is leaving the council, which, is a bit sad. And I'm sure we'll all miss her, but, she's going on to great things. So wish her the very best. But just from a logistics perspective, her last working day is the 13th of September. And any queries after this date need to go to the Democratic Services inbox until we have a replacement appointed, which is in the process of happening. My second announcement is that there is a public address in relation to the Net Zero Master Plan at this meeting. That will be a 5-minute presentation. Great. Any questions on the chair's announcements? I'm just going to keep rattling through, but shout if you want to stop. So are you happy to approve the minutes of the 11th of June 24, or if there are any amendments to them? And in a second, we'll go through the matters arising, of course. Great, we will approve then. And Alice, I'm going to hand over to you, if you don't mind, for the matters arising.
Yeah, thank you. So just going through those, on minute 4, Councillor Hunt's suggestions on the tree management policy, which weren't the formal recommendations, were forwarded on to the cabinet member and officers for consideration as agreed.
Thank you.
On minute 4, recommendation 7, the planning and regulatory services have investigated how the other local authorities have sought to incentivise, promote and encourage the planting, retention and renewal of trees in their policies, particularly in relation to HMOs and licensing. There are some legal restrictions on that on what can be done in relation to licensing, and no other authorities have been identified that implement such policies. Basically see the recommendation tracker for the fuller detail next to the recommendation, and any discussion on that particular matter. It's suggested that that's taken with the report back on recommendations later in the meeting.
Great. Yes, just to keep everything of the same topic together. Thank you. Let's do that.
And then minute 6, I have an update on the timetable for achieving the full set of EPCs that I've been asked to give on the officer's behalf. So currently there are 978 Oxford City homes, and that's 12% that do not have an EPC lodged. From the estimated data, these are likely to be equally split between above EPCC and below EPCC.
Okay.
The plan is to survey around 200 of these a year between now and 2030, when a full EPC data set is planned to be in place, subject to survey access. And this will be linked to the stock condition survey programme where possible. Where properties are identified that are below EPCC, works will be programmed into a project to improve the rating, and EPCs are also being updated following any planned works and projects to ensure EPCs are kept up to date going forward. So that's the update from officers on that.
Great, thank you.
And I'll minute that for anyone who would prefer to read that.
Yeah, effectively 5 years, 20% a year. Yeah.
Yeah, and then on minute 7, I haven't yet received responses on requests for the items for the work plan on loss and damage or the energy efficiency in council's commercial property portfolio and repurposing of car parks. So I'll leave that as a note for my successor as well to keep following up on. And then I believe on minute 7, Mish has been briefed to update the panel on the County Council climate adaptation work and the timetable for more detailed updates to come to panel. Hopefully I'm not,
Great. That all makes sense. Okay, good. We'll, yeah. Fine. Then could we just sort of from a general assent perspective, it'd be helpful if people can just sort of waive agreement or state disagreement. I'd quite like to rejig the order because of having a speaker. So I'd like to take item 7 first, basically 7, 8, 9, 10, and then come back to the work plan 5 and 6, the report and the recommendations and the dates of future meetings, because I think that just leverages everyone's time most effectively. If anyone disagrees with that, please can you speak now? Or give me a thumbs up or something if you're happy with that. Great. Alice, do we have the external speaker on the line? Excellent.
Yeah, I'll just add him in now.
Perfect. Good. So then I am going to suggest that we take the speaker who's requested. As you are all aware, members of the public are allowed to speak at scrutiny panels, as I'm sure you're also all aware. It's, this isn't a cabinet meeting. The speaker will speak for 5 minutes. I will ask the panelists if they have any questions and any responses, but there's no sort of right of reply. It's not an open discussion. We are just hearing from a member of the public who has exercised their democratic right to speak to us, which I'm sure we can all support. Excellent. Speaker Dan Glazebrook, are you on the line?
I am. Can you hear me?
Excellent. Hi, Dan.
Hi.
So you will be speaking on the sort of the importance of in carbon emissions, right? Minimizing embodied carbon in the construction of developments, and not just the output from the completed developments, i.e. the kind of construction phase as well, and also biodiversity and carbon offsetting schemes and how this fits into our city net zero master plan. Is that correct?
Indeed, yes.
Excellent. And so you have 5 minutes. Alice, can I ask you to time and give us a message in the chat when we're, I don't know, or give me 30 seconds before, or give us a message when the time is up, Alice, but maybe a warning of 30 seconds would be helpful as well. Yeah? Great. Excellent. Dan, please go.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, committee members, for the opportunity to address you this evening. Construction accounts for 45% of the UK's total carbon emissions, more than any other single sector, and almost as much as all other sectors combined. This is because of the massive carbon emitted in the process, the production of building materials. Demolition, meanwhile, accounts for fully 2/3 of the country's waste. The single most environmentally damaging thing that can be done with any building is therefore demolishing and rebuilding it. That is why there's now a consensus throughout the construction industry that it is far, far preferable to refurbish and retrofit old buildings and structures rather than demolish. Institute of Surveyors, of the Royal Institute of British Architects, of the Architects Journal, who are actually running a campaign supported by over a dozen award-winning architects on this issue. It's the position of the Chartered Institute of Building Services Engineers and of the Royal Academy of Engineering. All of them agree it's always better to refurbish a building than destroy it, even if the old building is not particularly energy efficient due to the massive carbon emissions involved in destruction and rebuilding. Yet, despite the professed concern for their carbon footprint and climate change, Oxford City Council has been going on a demolish and rebuild rampage. Blackbird Leys Community Centre, the Chinese Community Centre in Princes Street, and the East Oxford Games Hall are the three most obvious examples. The justification for demolishing the Games Hall and selling off that site was that it would finance the quote sustainable refurbishment of the community centre around the corner in Princes Street, yet this is total greenwash. We commissioned a local firm of architects to give a ballpark figure for refitting the Games Hall building to replace the roof and bring the building up to modern standards based on similar projects they'd undertaken in the past, and they told us it would likely cost around £200,000. That is less than 4% of the money the council set aside to redevelop the old community centre in Princes Street, which would serve, in fact, to preserve a beautiful sports facility, the only community-owned sports facility in East Oxford, in fact, and one that served the community for generations. But instead, the council took the most carbon-intensive route possible, bulldozed the site, and lost it to the community forever. That'd be bad enough, but the parading of this choice as somehow promoting sustainable development risks transforming that very concept into a bad joke. The same is true of the Oxbends River Bridge. No assessment was made of the carbon footprint of the bridge's construction, which is set to use steel and concrete, two of the most carbon-intensive materials available. And the project's again being paraded as somehow eco-friendly because it will supposedly reduce traffic. Yet anyone who knows the area knows this claim is completely farcical. The idea that there are significant numbers of people in South and West Oxford stubbornly refusing to use either of the two existing cycle and footbridges across the river within a quarter-mile radius of the new one, and instead driving into the West Gate, will be suddenly converted to active travel by the provision of a third bridge in the area is a joke. No such people exist. Barely anyone drives into town from those neighbourhoods, and no one who does will be tempted to abandon their car by a variant of the existing route. All of this speaks to a major problem in the calculation of carbon emissions. Currently, the environmental impact of a project only takes account of the energy usage involved once it's built. The energy that goes into into a building is neither calculated nor considered except in certain circumstances. This actually puts the Oxford Labour Council behind the former Tory government, who required a whole life carbon assessment to be made of any building projects they commissioned. I see there's an aspiration for Ox Place residential builds to calculate the embedded carbon within them, and this is to be welcomed. But what is needed in addition to this is a commitment to making lifelong carbon assessments of all construction projects, and more importantly, a commitment to following the advice of the entire sector and to have an assumption in favour of retrofitting and refurbishing rather than bulldozing and rebuilding. Unless and until such a commitment is made, everything the council does in terms of emissions will be more than wiped out by its frenzied destruction and construction, and such glaring hypocrisy undermines all other efforts to persuade others to reduce emissions. The final issue I wanted to briefly touch on is biodiversity net gain. The council's own guidelines on this matter stipulate that the aim should always be to avoid biodiversity loss in the first place, and biodiversity offsetting should only be used as a last resort. Presumably, this is for the very good reason that there's a growing consensus that such offsetting is an ineffective con. Surely the council should set an example here and should rule out the use of offsetting wherever it itself is the developer. Again, with the Oxpens River Bridge, the woodland scheduled to be destroyed is to be supposedly compensated for by throwing some money at an offsetting scheme somewhere else. The council cannot expect other developers to meet higher standards than it itself is prepared to meet, and should therefore rule out such offsetting when it comes to its own developments. Thank you, committee members.
Thank you so much, Dan, for making the time to come and speak to us. As you are probably aware, this is a scrutiny meeting, so we don't give you a reply. I will just ask if any of the scrutiny members on the panels have any comments they wish to make. Great, thank you. Yeah, we will. I mean, I found that interesting. I will take your points on board. It's not, some of it's relevant to this meeting, but it's not relevant to this particular meeting today. You know, some of it's relevant to the scope of the wider panel. But really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Due to the process, everyone, I'm going to have to move on, which is to item number 7. The Net Zero Master Plan. Mish, can I get you to introduce the report if you want to, or I can just open up the panel straight away. But Mish, I think it'd be helpful if you can introduce the report.
Yes, I'm very happy to do so, Chair. Just to sort of highlight a few points. I mean, we agreed previously to sort of focus on change effectively in the report, just to keep things simple. So I'm pleased to say that we have now sort of commenced the BNG project, indeed something which is very directly linked to what was just being referenced, and where we're looking at sites that the City Council owns within the city. We've got 8 plots now that are confirmed and have already been baselined in terms of their ecology, so that that one's moving forward. I'm pleased to say that we've got an officer in post on the carbon literacy work, and that's being rolled out. And to highlight this one that's been stuck for quite a long time around the detailed costings and commitments around the carbon management plan, what we've agreed to do now is to bring forward a paper in the early new year that will look at the full breadth of activities that the council is focused on in terms of meeting its 2030 commitments, and we're going to make an assessment of where we think we're at with that, and that should in many respects sort of pick up issues of costs associated with it. Just a few others. In terms of the fleet, that we've seen a reduction now of 10% in terms of the actual size of the fleet, and that will lead to a reduction in emissions. That's a cost saving as well, of course, from the council's perspective. And then moving into the sort of 2040 space, looking at our kind of wider commitments around net zero at the city level. Workers sort of is restarting with the biodiversity strategy. We had issues there essentially associated with the challenge in being able to bring on board a permanent replacement ecology officer. So we're kind of iterating it forwards. It remains in amber, but it is kind of recommencing work in that space. It is a very important piece of work for us in this current financial year, as it's part and parcel of us being able to demonstrate the delivery of our biodiversity duties as a council. And on the what was the other one I was going to highlight for you? Yes, in terms of the Green Tech, we're sort of continuing to work with Green Tech. They've renewed their we've renewed our affiliation with them, and that is now linked with the expansion of ZCOP, which I'm going to be talking about separately in the meeting, provides, we think, a stronger basis for our collective work with SMEs in terms of decarbonisation of that sector. So that was just a few ones to sort of note for you.
Great, thank you. Panelists, I'm going to open up to questions in just a second. I'm just going to start with one of my own, as it is relevant to the initial speaker, which was just around kind of embodied carbon of construction. So I believe we have an ambition to reduce that. How are we looking at that? Do we have, I think we have targets as well, but how, just trying to pull in some of the, questions from the public, like where are we with reducing embodied carbon in the construction process, and how that fits both to our own construction and that of other, planning permissions that are granted. Do we have a clarity on that? And apologies if we don't.
Yes, we do. That is very much part and parcel of the new local plan, which is currently in
the 2040. Yeah,
the 2040 local plan. So that both it does a number of things. It sets requirements for new builds for net zero buildings in operation. So that means essentially everything, all of the energy that is used in that building. That also that there should be an expectation that energy needs are met through renewables on site. Now that's not going to be possible in all circumstances where you've got say high energy using labs being built, but for housing we would expect solar to be integral to new developments. And to the point on embodied carbon, that we want to see reduced embodied carbon in the construction process, and that will need to be measured. So it is very much yes there within the local plan. Obviously that's going through its examination at the moment and is subject to the outcome of that process.
Is there a target for reducing the embodied carbon in the construction process yet, or are we at the stage of it must be reduced, but we haven't said by like a certain percentage versus traditional construction or anything? Sorry, I know this is in the local plan somewhere. I just can't find it right this second.
I think that is the case, because I think that there's going to be different levels of embodied carbon associated with different forms of build, but where we want to see reporting of it, measurement of it, and it'll probably be integral to each development.
Great, thank you. That answers my question. Does anyone else have a question?
I think Jemima was first.
Jemima. Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, thank you. My question really was about the requirement to maintain council buildings, because two examples, I thought the speaker made a lot of very interesting and valid points. Two buildings that come to mind since I've been in East Oxford and a councillor are the Cowley Temple swimming pool and the Standingford House 1960s industrial building on Cave Street. Both were demolished on the basis that they were too expensive to repair. The point being, why had they been allowed to fallen into such degraded a state? Why were they in a state of disrepair, meaning therefore the argument was to demolish them? They were both purpose-built buildings and in my view should have and could have been retrofitted and refurbed. So I think it's just, is there a requirement in the local plan or elsewhere about maintenance of buildings to prevent this from happening?
There are certainly requirements around retrofit, but what you're talking about is slightly different, I think, to what is there in the local plan. So this is essentially a decision as to whether or not a building is still fit for purpose in terms of its usage. I have to say that the decision in respect of the Temple Cowley pool precedes my tenure at the council, but my understanding of it, councillor, is that it was a decision that we didn't need as many swimming pools, in particular having built a new pool at Blackbird Leys. So I mean, I think it's a question more of the principle of whether or not the building is fit for purpose in terms of its general use, whereas the guidelines around retrofit are more to do with energy standards in buildings.
Thanks. Jemima, let me know if that doesn't answer your question, if you have a follow-up. No. Great. Catherine, Councillor Miles.
Yes, I just have a follow-up related to these rebuild versus retrofit. I do have some other points for later, but maybe we close off this point first. And really, Mish, I just want to understand. Yeah, has the council done some work on understanding sort of, even if we're not setting a particular target at this stage, what kind of methodologies are appropriate to understand whether, to do that assessment as to whether something is retrofitted versus rebuild? Because I'm sure that there is, it's not always quite as simple as everything should be retrofitted. So I'm wondering, what work have we done in this area? Is that something that we need to look at in parallel to the local plan process that is ongoing, and also to understand, have we done any work to understand where other councils have adopted a whole of life carbon assessment approach for construction, and just in terms of what the best practice is in other councils around the country, please, with this regard. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can just pick up the second bit first, because yes, definitely the planning policy team looked carefully at a number of other councils. I mean, I wouldn't do justice to, I mean, Dan Young in the planning policy team who drafted the chapter on carbon and energy and so forth, did a lot of research looking at a lot of other councils, and I think that it's fair to say that both that the proposals that we're putting in there around embodied carbon and around net zero and what we're defining as net zero build are stringent relative to many of the other councils in the country, but also, and perhaps encouragingly, that some of our near neighbours, for example, Southern Vale Council, when you look at their sort of local plan, which is kind of tracking a few months behind ours, is actually borrowing directly from some of the measures we're using. In respect of the first question around retrofit rebuild, I think I'm just going to have to come back to the sort of the difference between a building that is being retrofitted because of the need to improve its energy performance, and of course there are requirements, for example, as on the council as a landlord in respect of buildings, that we've got many commercial assets that we rent out to others, and where we're going to be required to raise the overall performance of those buildings. There's issues associated with buildings because of their historic value, the conservation areas, listed buildings like the town hall and so forth, where clearly retrofit is more complicated, but also the fact that it is a listed a building or a building in a conservation area, I guess, means that it is less likely to be demolished and something else put in its place. And then there's the sort of the question about whether or not a building has a kind of a could be sort of repurposed or so now this is there'll be many others in the council with much more expertise than I, but perhaps a useful one consider as an example might be the ice rink. So we have an ice rink, which is this year 40 years old. It should get to 50 years old, but I think that on the basis of the engineer assessments and so forth that we have, interesting and arguably unique and in some eyes beautiful building that we've got is unlikely to make 60. And that's simply because it's not structurally going to sort of work to that time. So unless it were perhaps completely repurposed in some other way that could preserve it as a structure, it is unlikely that we will have that, and we would have to build a new ice rink. That I don't think is a question about retrofitting per se. It's more about placement, and I have to say I think there are others. I completely get the point about there are carbon sort of factors that need to be taken into consideration on these decisions, but I do think that there are others in the council, in our corporate property team, who are going to have better knowledge and expertise in this space than I on such decisions.
Thank you.
Sorry, everyone, I'm having a little challenge with connections. Councillor Miles, does that answer your questions?
It does. I mean, I think some of the themes that have been mentioned in the response, and that we've heard from the speaker, may sort of point to either existing recommendations that we've mentioned, or we just want to reassert some commitments around a kind of guiding principles at some point, but we can come back to that maybe in our discussions. I have some other questions related to other points on the net zero. Would you like me to take them now, Councillor Kerr, or should I after Councillor Harley?
Let me pass over to Councillor Harley, and she can let us know if her questions on this or on something else, and then we can make the decision. But Councillor Harley, over to you.
It was really a follow-up to Councillor Hunt's comment about Temple Cowley pools, just for information. I live in Temple Cowley. I'm one of the Temple Cowley Pools campaigners, and we formed a community interest company to offer to purchase and refurbish the pool ourselves, to allow housing around it. But for political reasons, we were not allowed to do so. And we were told by an inspector for the local plan at the time that a political decision had been made. It wasn't based on environmental factors or carbon emissions or anything of that kind. It was purely political, because a swimming pool was required to be in Blackbird Leys, and so ours was going to be demolished and put forward for housing. And I think there are a number of instances where housing developments are being pushed ahead of community concerns. The same happened to Cowley Community Centre. And we need to get back to doing more assessment on whether this is actually the most viable option for these particular community infrastructure projects. It was just to add that bit of background information.
Thank you. Thank you for the context. Councillor Miles.
Yes, thank you. So I've got two questions from Mish. So please, first, with regards to the action item number 1 in the overarching items, which is around the producing this detailed costings for commitments in the carbon management plan. There's a reference here about the RAG status, which is showing red, where it says this progressing this is impacted by a lack of data and systems to capture the relevant information. Do we need to do more research on what systems requirements, the system requirements that need to be invested to be met, and investments that need to be made in meeting these requirements to enable you as a prerequisite for being able to sort of progress this, and what kind of missing data are we talking about here? That I don't want to get into all the details, but just what kind of investment needs to be made to enable you to move forward on this agenda item. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this is a particularly complicated one, because within there's also assumptions. So I think so let's give a different example around, say, fleet. We've got getting our fleet to zero by 2030 is certainly part of this target. There are different ways of achieving that. We've been on a track to date around electrification of the fleet. We know what the cost of we've got about 30-odd%, now about a third, just around a third of our fleet is electric. The 2/3 that are not, all but one, that's all but one dust cart. We know that a dust cart currently, an electric dust cart costs 400 grand circa, versus about half that for a conventional diesel one. Actually, but it's a moving figure. And then what about a hydrogen one? Not sure about that. What types of actions in respect of our EPCC commitment for our social housing, which is another one of our 2030 commitments? We don't have all of the data yet on our EPC ratings for council housing. So yeah, we are lacking data. I think it's not data because we don't have, I think it's essentially that we haven't got all of the information yet, rather than we don't have the ability to get information, I think is probably what is meant more there. And our commitment to bring a paper forwards, which is actually going to make a assessment, a high level assessment, I think it would be fair to say, but nonetheless, an assessment in early 25 about where we feel we are at in terms of progress towards our 2030 target and where we see the main risks around that are. It should begin to answer some of these questions. Costs will be part of that, I don't doubt, but they'll also will be able to identify in a bit more detail where some of these information gaps might be.
That's really helpful. So essentially, there's no need to assume that we need extra budget to sort of fund systems to collect data, which enables you to move forward on that, essentially.
No, I don't think so, other than
Okay.
I don't want to get into the whole issue of the asset management database, which is a big issue and one which continues to be sort of worked through, but that is definitely part of it. But no, I don't think per se this is a sort of a systems matter. No,
that's helpful, thank you. And my follow-up, which is on a different item, was on item number 21, which is around continue the additional licensing scheme for HMOs, including proactive enforcement of F&G EPC properties. And I just wondered with that, whether ahead of like the winter cold season, there has been any particular action that is planned to address this, because I don't know whether that is still ongoing. I mean, it says green, but given that there are still HMOs and selective licensed properties that are basically very cold and inefficient, and we know that energy prices are going to be high, can we suggest some proactive enforcement of this, like do a short-term blitz, for instance, ahead of the winter season, so that actions are being taken there? Because it just it's going to impact the cost of living for people in those properties, and we know that there are many in the city of that rating potentially. So just wanting to clarify status there and what we could be doing about it if we need to recommend something. Thank you.
Yes, I mean, on this one, I'm afraid, as the note on the document says, we haven't had an update on that, so I can't report you kind of progress in terms of where we're at relative to the previous update. What I will do, though, is I will take that away, and indeed that specific suggestion that you made. I mean, enforcement is already something which we're committed to do. So you're really in saying that, Councillor, I think you're basically asking that we do what we've committed to do. So I will check and with colleagues in the licensing team and see where things are at around this action.
Thank you. And I think that recognises that whilst we have enforcement capacity and it's our responsibility, there is not as much capacity to do all of the enforcement that we'd like to do. So we need to prioritise, and that might be a degree of prioritisation that could be made. But thank you. That's it. I'll hand back to the chair. Thank you, Chair.
Great. I have a couple of further ones on the actions. On the carbon literacy training, so action 3, is that being rolled out to all staff? The sort of implication is that it is, but it also might just be procurement staff. And is there a timetable for delivery, once all those staff have completed it, and is it available to members? I suppose those are my 3 bucketed questions on that.
Yes, so no is the answer to the first. No, it's definitely not going to go to all staff. At the moment, and we're in discussions about how many get the full training. So the full training at the is a full day. So it's quite a big. It's a big time commitment. We're all the first groups have already been put through that, and for people in, for example, in the property team, I mean, this is particularly important in other sort of regen and other capital projects teams. The expectation is I should certainly be put through it, and other senior managers in the council as well. And I have had a list I've discussed with a colleague about members being offered this training, and I've already said that everybody clearly on the climate and environment panel, and I've also suggested all of the climate spokesperson leads for the different groups that we've got should be offered the training as well. In terms then of the kind of wider staff training, at the moment we're looking at 200 so of our staff, which is, I guess, about a quarter, but potentially a fair number of them getting a slightly rather condensed version of the current exercise, because I'm not sure that we can justify the full day out for 200 people.
Understood. Is it possible to kind of summarize that in the tracker, maybe, just because it says obviously key areas such as procurement, but it's probably plus another couple, and then it sounds like it'll be the most senior, maybe 20%, which completely makes sense across the council. But just to give us a bit more granularity on that, partly because cell D5 says all staff attending training, which presumably doesn't mean all staff, it means all planned staff. But I think it would just be, that's under the resources section. I think it would just probably be helpful to have it at some point, you know, just one sentence on it clarifying that.
Absolutely.
Awesome, thank you. Just looking on action 1, which is kind of the, you know, meeting net zero, is it sorry, I mean, it's a low important, or sorry, it's a low chance that we won't meet net zero, kind of my understanding, but it's fairly important, obviously. So is there any question about our ability to meet our net zero targets? I see that there's a paper coming up in 25. You know, is there a risk to this? You know, should we be looking at our overall targets to come to this panel in early next year as well? Whilst basically it feels like it's low probability, but is it also low priority given it's so important? And forgive me if I've missed a point there.
Yes, so I first want to characterize the rating as low here, not as as a judgment on whether or not we are going to meet our net zero 2030 target. That low actually is a view on the priority being attached to, in a sense, delivering this particular action, which is to produce detailed costings for commitments made in the carbon management plan, etc., etc. And the reason we're attaching a low priority to that, for the reasons, in a sense, that I've rehearsed to some extent, that we just don't feel that we've got all the information that would enable us to produce that sort of overall costing. So it's, in a sense, we've been kind of slow pedaling on that and rather focusing on delivering individual actions. And now, as we're going, as the update column says, we will bring forward a kind of a fairly broad report early next year, which will both sort of track progress, where we think we're at, where we actually give you a view on whether or not we think we're going to meet 2030 and what the risks and issues associated with that are. And as part of that judgment, I'm sure that the cost issues will come into play as well.
Great, thank you, Claire. I think my final question is just the, hold on, I've written it down somewhere. On the action 4 about the land, it says it's waiting for April 24. Should it say waiting for April 25? Action 4 here. Sorry, everyone. Waiting for sorry, column J4.
Yeah, no, that's wrong. Yeah, I apologies. It shouldn't say waiting for April 24. I think that probably was a relevant note put into this report a long while ago.
Understood.
Things are moving now. Work is, in fact, funnily enough, I was in a project board meeting today on this particular project. It is moving forwards, and I can report that as I was saying a bit earlier, all of the baseline assessments for those individual plots of land have now been done. So these were ecological assessments which we had independently commissioned, so that we've got that ready now, and all further improvements that are made with biodiversity on those pieces of land can be measured against these baselines, which are done. So there's lots of more work to be done in this particular project, but it's definitely underway.
Great. And Mish, I'm really sorry to be nitpicky about this. Column H4 has got a date that doesn't exist. So that's probably wrong as well, because it's not 25 months. It might be American style. It says 6/25/25, or it might be a typo. So that just also needs correcting.
Yes, unquestionably it does. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, great. Oh, actually, no. No, that's fine. That is it. That is, I think, are all my questions. Anybody else on the panel have any further questions on this agenda item? Excellent. Thank you. And thank you, Councillor Ailton and Mish, for attending. I believe you're actually also both staying for the next item. So, thank you. Right, so we are moving on to item 6, which is item 8 in the agenda pack, and that is the annual air quality status report. So I would love to welcome Councillor Ailton and Pedro Abreu, and I'd love to invite you to introduce the report.
Right. Hi, everyone. Okay, so this report provides an overview of air quality in Oxford during 2023. It obviously fulfills the requirements of the local air quality management regime, which is the regime that all the local authorities in the UK are required to follow, and which is set out on Part 4 of the Environment Act of 1995. So the local air quality management process places an obligation on local authorities to regularly review and assess air quality in their local areas, and to determine whether or not the legal air quality objectives for the various pollutants is being achieved. So this publication of this annual status report is therefore an annual requirement from DEFRA, and shows the strategies employed by the city to improve air quality and any progress that has been made. And in terms of an overview of the report, I think the news are very positive. So in 2023, we have monitored nitrogen dioxide levels at around 128 locations within the city. We could see that overall levels of this pollutant have continued to decrease, and decreased by 14% in 2023 in comparison with the previous year. And this, we also see that levels are reducing faster in Oxford than throughout the UK, where the reduction on average in 2023 was of only 9%. From those 122 sites, only 2 sites are found to be in breach of the legal limits. But those sites are not important to emphasize that they are not relevant to human exposure. Those are sites that are either on the Ring Road or in a specific area of the city, Haddington Hill, which are sites that were started being monitored more to assess the impact of future traffic measures, such as the impact of traffic filters, etc., rather than to assess the impact on exposure of people, because obviously people don't live in those areas. And from those 128 sites, also important to emphasize that we have Oxford wants to go above and beyond the legal limit. We have our own local annual mean target for this pollutant, which is significantly more strict than the legal one. So the legal one is 40 micrograms per cubic meter annual mean. The local annual mean target that we've committed with to deliver by 2025 in our air quality action plan is an annual mean of 30 micrograms per cubic meter. And from those 128 sites where nitrogen dioxide levels were monitored in the city, only 9 were in breach of these local annual mean targets in 2023. Those locations were St. Aldate's, St. Clement's in 2 locations, 1 location on High Street, Holloway Road, Haddington Hill, and 3 locations around the Ring Road. So just to put everything in context, NO2 levels in 2023 are now on average around 33% below 2019 levels, which is the last pre-pandemic year. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Pedro. Councillor Elton, do you have any comments to add?
I do not.
Excellent. So over to questions. I have quite a few questions, but I'm going to let the rest of the panel go first. So does anybody else want to have any questions on this? Councillor Miles, you have put your hand up first. You can go first.
Thank you. I also have a number related to slightly different topics, but
I tell you what, actually, could you do 3 questions at a time, maybe, if they can bucket together, and then Pedro can answer them a few at a time.
Good idea. Thank you. And just really congratulations to the air quality team for the excellent work that they've been taking forward on this, Pedro. Really impressive, and so thank you. And so one thing I note was that closure of the Botley Road has led to a 17% reduction of NO2 levels. As we know, there have been some changes in the schedule of the closure for the Botley Road, which looks like it's now extended. But at some point it will reopen. And so what I'm wondering is whether you're already exploring what measures could be planned to ensure that this reduction is retained when the Botley Road eventually is reopened. For example, future ZEZ expansion, this sort of thing, because what would be a great shame is if that these gains are then reversed on reopening of that road. So yeah, question being, are you looking at these plans to ensure this reduction is retained? And then second question is, are you working on any site-specific action plans for those select sites that you've mentioned where they have been in breach of Oxford's local annual mean target? So for instance, around Haddington Hill, for instance, you mentioned that. Has something specifically been looked at as an action plan for that site? And then the third question is, are we taking forward any further community communications campaigns with specific groups, target groups, like for instance with the schools around sustainable transportation, for instance? So yeah, I think there was something in previous plans which noted that there's been some action on that area in the past. So any future plans for that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think I'm going to start with the second one. Future plans for the locations that are currently in breach of legal air quality limits or of our own local annual mean targets. So we currently have an air quality action plan in place, which was launched in January 2021 with a set of measures, 30 measures. And that should be delivered and covered for the period up until the end of 2025. So there are a few air quality measures that are still in the process of being finalized and delivered, and that will certainly accelerate and continue to reduce emissions across the city, and in particular in those areas. One in particular that comes to mind is the one that I think you are all aware, the delivery of the 159 electric buses in the city. So that accounts for when delivered. The delivery was postponed. Originally was supposed to be delivered by the end of June, and now we are looking at, I think, end of November for this to be finalized. But we are looking at a measure that will certainly, we will expect to be having a great impact already in 2024 in the next reports, because once fully delivered, it accounts for 61% of the total mileage of bus mileage in the city. So, and according to our latest source apportionment reports, the specific contribution of buses to NO2 emissions in the city is 33%.
Is that of the 68% or 33% overall, i.e. about 50% of the 68%? Sorry,
no, 33% of the 68%, which corresponds to the transport sector.
Understood. So then it's like
Yeah.
23% of overall. So gosh, it's nearly a quarter of all the pollution is
Well,
buses.
it won't be necessarily
take.
a quarter now, because this source apportionment was done at the
Yeah,
end of
sorry, I'm
2020.
being high level
Yeah,
here.
that's
but
fine.
yeah,
At
yeah.
the end of 2020, we are actually now in the process of commissioning for an updated version of the source apportionment to be done, because obviously this current figure is not we believe it's not as accurate now, because a few years have passed. And then on top of what I was saying about the buses, it's important to highlight that the work for the development of new air quality measures that support a new air quality action plan for the city is expected to start in January 2025. So this is a long process that takes an entire year, and as you know, involves public consultation, engagement with different internal and external stakeholders to agree on the necessary measures for the next cycle of 5 years. And from that work, obviously, which still is to be developed, expected to be developed, new air quality measures are expected, so that we can continue this good trend of continuing to reduce air quality levels in the city. With regards to taking forward future comms campaigns, we don't have anything in specific. So we've already created an anti-idling campaign in the past. Most recently, we've launched the Do You Fuel Good campaign, which is focused on providing best practice and advice on how to use wood burners. We do have, however, a new officer that is expected to kind of join our air quality team on the 9th of October. And his role is specifically community engagement officer. So he's going to support some of the work that I'm developing around boating communities, around the wood smoke thing. But obviously, he's working across the board. He's also supporting some elements within the energy team around fuel poverty and something like that. So once he arrives, we will have certainly a little bit more time and capacity to kind of think about future work around community engagement. And yeah, the first one on Botley Road closure. Yes, it would be amazing if we could retain this reduction. We don't have anything planned for now, but it's important to say that the levels that were being measured at Botley before the road closure were already below our local annual mean targets. So Botley is not an area, cannot be considered an air quality hotspot from a nitrogen dioxide perspective. Obviously, there will always be an impact, because once you open the road, there will be cars necessarily. But yeah, we don't have a specific measure planned to attack that area of the city. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Pedro. Councillor Harley, over to you.
I've got questions about the measurements on Hollow Way. Can you tell me how discreetly you sample the air, given that this is one of the roads that breaches your limits? Do you sample hourly and report hourly? Because at certain times of day, there are huge traffic queues that you can sit in for hours. And related to that is, are you monitoring the stretch of ring road between the Slade connection to the ring road and the Rose Hill and or the Hayford Hill roundabouts? Because at the moment, at certain times of day, the traffic on those is at a standstill. And it would be interesting to know if you've got baseline background measurements from those for now, to see how they compare if and when the bus gates are implemented on Hollow Way.
Okay. first one on Holloway Road. So this links a little bit with the limitations of our current monitoring techniques. So we have two types of monitoring that we use. One is the most accurate one, which are automatic monitors. They require continuous access to energy. They monitor in continuous, but they are very bulky, and there's a lot of contracts. They occupy a lot of space, and there's a lot of contracts that gravitate around an automatic monitoring station. Contracts for audits, contracts for servicing the instruments, and so on and so forth. And it's very difficult, and we don't have the finance, the money to kind of install a network of hundreds of these automatic monitors throughout the city. Neither the city layout would allow for those monitors to be installed in some of the locations that are of interest. So what we use is another monitoring technique, which is called the diffusion tubes. Those are passive samplers, which means that they don't need access to electricity. And we expose them once a month, and then we send them to the lab at the end of the month, and they calculate the concentrations of nitrogen dioxide that throughout that entire monthly period. So the advantage is that they are much cheaper. They can be installed easily on lampposts and all sorts of street furniture, but they are not as accurate as the automatic monitors. So yeah, we do use a correction. We calculate what's called a bias adjustment factor at the end of the year, so that we can kind of reduce as much as possible that uncertainty that is associated to that with that measurement technique. So yeah, that's a big limitation. We get monthly readings out of these diffusion tubes, which we then average at the end of the year, so that we can have an annual mean, which we can then compare against the legal annual mean limits. With regards to monitoring at other locations of the city, so we have a diffusion tube at the Slade. We have several monitoring diffusion tubes at Rose Hill, Newman's Road, and we have 5 or 6 monitoring tubes spread around the ring road to try to kind of cover most of the areas of the ring road. So yeah, we have pretty good coverage, I would say, that would allow us to establish a very good baseline for the assessment of future transport interventions.
Great, thank you. This is a question that I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer, but do we, you've included here the amounts that come from different types of pollution, basically 68% from transport, 20% or 19% from residential and commercial heating. Do we have any feel for how much those are shrinking and growing? In other words, like what that might look like in the future. In other words, how we should be looking at this for the next 5 years. I am specifically here thinking about wood burning stoves, because nationally we know that they are the biggest source of growth of PM2, but I just don't know if we have enough data to be able to assert what that looks like in Oxford. So yeah, that's my question.
Yes, that's a very good question. Thank you. That's what the new source apportionment study is supposed to kind of give us some more updated information on. So as part of the process for developing the new air quality action plan, the first step is to commission a source apportionment study. So we've done that in 2020 to launch the air quality action plan in 2021, and we expect to be doing this within the next few months.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's for the next 5 years, but we just don't really know yet, and it's not really that relevant to look at the 2020 stuff because we had so much.
You can compare one with the other. What I can say to add to that is that I'm going to ask for this source apportionment to go to the granularity, to a level of granularity that the previous one didn't go. So I'm going to ask for the consultants to look, and instead of just saying residential contribution from residential, I want them to tell me exactly how much that mean in terms of contribution from gas, contribution from wood burning, and so on.
Great.
So I'm going to try to do this kind of level of refinement precisely because there's a lot of things happening in this space, and we've one of the measures that we are going to deliver from the 1st of December. It was a long work, is the expansion of our smoke control areas, as you know, and so
Brilliant. Yeah.
smoke has a lot of importance these days because of the PM 2.5 and those nasty pollutants that are nasty to our human health. So there is all interest in knowing all those types of informations in the new source support.
Great. And again, obviously that's cyclical, right? That's the problem, is if you average wood burning out over the whole year, it doesn't look that bad, because it only takes place in about 3 months, you know, and in particular times of day. So that's my kind of concern with wood burning and averages. But I suspect the consultants will be on that. And yeah, great. I mean, you know, as you know, I'm a huge supporter of the work you do, and I'm really impressed with this report, so thank you. Also, I really appreciate the summary. It does make it easier to read. I understand it's not in the statutory format, and of course we have to do this in the statutory format, but yeah, like it's clear, it's good, and I'm really looking forward to the next 5 years. So there you go. So that wasn't a question, really, it was just a
try
statement.
to make
Thank
you as short,
Pedro.
to make it as short as possible, but it still took 4 or 5 pages. But
yeah, you know, it's good, it's helpful. Councillor Miles.
Yes, thank you. So I've got my other 2 points that I'd like to raise. And one is, in your report, you mentioned that there was a potential lack of central government funding to help implement future air quality measures at a local level. And I think this was with reference to DEFRA's air quality grant being withheld. Just want to clarify whether you've got any insights of the new government's funding position, and do we as a council need to be writing to the Prime Minister or DEFRA regarding sort of prioritising extra funding for air quality measures? So that's the first thing. The second question relates to transport emissions and this breakdown of where they come from. Now, I've read recently that UK light aircraft still run on lead fuel, and we have a airport north of Oxford, which this primarily is served by or servicing light aircraft. So we as a city are having these aircraft flying over us, and I'm wondering, have you explored how this is impacting the city's air quality, and is there any leverage we can apply to the airport, and maybe it has to be a national issue and maybe in central government to address the fact that UK light aircraft are still running on lead and this is impacting the city's air quality? So it might be that you don't have an answer for that, and if you don't, maybe that's something we can come back to, but at another stage. But thank you in advance.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. With regards to the central government lack of funding, yes, it is. That's correct. The Conservative government decided to pull all the air quality grant funding that they had already submitted the letters to most local authorities awarding them the money, and then they pull the carpet at last minute. So everyone was really upset with that. Luckily for us, it didn't impact us. It's not impacting us on the immediate, because all the 30 measures that we have on our air quality action plan, all the ones that required necessary funding, we were able to obtain that funding in previous years. So that was a good thing. Yeah, I really don't know. I suspect Labour will want to go back to that, but that's entering into politics, and I have no idea. Yeah. Transport emissions and airports. Yes. So what can I say about that? I can say that lead is not considered at national level at the moment a pollutant of interest. They've stopped monitoring lead officially in the UK around 24 years ago. So that was when the European Union banned the lead from petrol, and so from that period, there is from petrol vehicles. So from that period onwards, it was monitored in the following years, but the concentrations that were being monitored across the country were so low that they've decided to kind of that was a waste of time to continue monitoring lead. Just so that you can have an idea, it's the annual mean concentration for lead is not 0.5 micrograms per cubic meter. So that's the legal limit. If you compare it with the nitrogen dioxide, which is 40, you can see that it is a huge kind of, there's a huge difference. I know that at commercial level, normally jet fuel that is used for to feed airplanes doesn't have lead. There is, however, a little bit of lead on the fuels of small light aircraft that are used by people that normally fly as a hobby, which I'm aware that, you know, there's a certain percentage of that of those types of light aircrafts that use Oxford International Airports. What else can I say? That the airport is in Kidlington, which is, you know, it's outside of our administrative area. It's the administrative area of Cherwell District Council. So we don't have many powers to do anything in there if there was an issue, which I don't believe there is, to be honest, due to all the things that I said before about lead being decommissioned at national level, and all of that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. I'm going to try and wrap this just because we're sort of 2 minutes over, which obviously isn't the end of the world. But just to kind of summarise then, our recommendations from last year involved, you know, an executive summary, which you've done. Thank you. Another recommendation that we made last year was to ensure that we were doing comprehensive comms. You've already done that, and you're hiring someone for community engagement. So hopefully there can kind of be an update on that again next year. I don't think there have been any other recommendations thus far, although I will just open that to the panel so far. So it feels like we keep those recommendations, but are aware that you're already doing them. So we're kind of, you know, reporting against them. And then I suppose my final question / recommendation is there any chance that we could have this earlier, i.e. consideration or input before approval? Because at the moment we're having it just pre-cabinet, but after it's gone to the press, I mean, it may not fit with the schedule, because obviously I understand that it's you know, but just throwing that out there is to see if it's possible to have input into it earlier before it gets into the press. And Councillor Miles, if you have any comments specifically on recommendations, do you want to come back, and then we'll chat back to Pedro and to Councillor Railton. Councillor Miles, over to you.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I think I'd like to see a recommendation that we write to central government, or ask the council to write to central government to secure future funding for air quality measures at a district level. I also would like to see something recommended around exploring securing the NO2 reduction, the gains made in NO2 reduction around the Botley Road area for when it is reopened. So there is a sort of a proactive conversation around how can we address this, recognising the road will be reopened, but we want to, at some point in the future, but we want to secure those gains that are made, and how does that relate to ZDZ expansion? I know that the council does seek grant funding for different air quality measures from DEFRA particularly, but something that has come up from the community multiple times and from other councillors of different parties is that we look for air quality display boards potentially, and could we explore looking at that as a recommendation to disseminate key messages on things like rethinking their route, some kind of information around what the current air quality level is. It can be a traffic light system. I think in Paris there's a lot of this, and also maybe number of air quality deaths per year, you know, something that shocks people, something that supports behaviour change as well. Yeah, could we seek funding for that? And if it means looking elsewhere because we haven't got the funding internally, you know, can we seek that proactively as a recommendation? Thank you.
Great, thank you. Sorry, Pedro, do you want to take that?
No. Yeah, I was about to say, with regards to the display boards, that's something that we've already thought about. So the Oxonair, the new air quality website for Oxfordshire, which was a joint project led by Oxford City Council, but with the input and contribution from the other districts and the county. We have been having chats about that and considering that we could perhaps look into kind of finding a way of connecting the information or linking the information that we present on the website and try to have it displayed in the city at some point. But that requires funding and a lot of more conversations. So it's not something that, it's still to be explored for future, perhaps for the next air quality action plan for the next cycle. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. This was just a point, really, joining the dots here in terms of vehicle usage and numbers in our city, whether we could have a recommendation to go to licensing about capping the number of taxi licenses that are given out, because like other cities, Oxford has no cap on the number of taxi licenses. Birmingham, Wolverhampton, they're all having the same conversation. And I do think, particularly in light of the Highway Chief and Andrew Gant's words today in the Oxford Mail about sensible numbers of vehicles in this city, it's worth making a note on the need to cap the number of taxi licenses.
Presumably that would be separate for e-taxis and non-e-taxis. Obviously, they both have pollutants. We know about tire pollutants, etc. Pedro, I'm not sure that's the. I'm not sure that fits into the scope of this. Alice may be able to advise me on this, but it is. It's a recommend. Or Mish, you look like you might be able to make a comment on that. Mish.
Yes, we actually currently have a consultation that's live on our consultation portal on Hackney carriage quantity control. So there's literally a consultation about whether or not we should introduce reduce essentially the number of licenses for Hackney carriage vehicles in the city, or increase it, of course. There is this is something which is being considered in that space. That's Hackney carriages, to be clear. Rather,
yeah, that's it. What is that, like 20% of the total taxis or something? Is that because that would? I can't remember. Don't worry. Don't quote me on that. I shouldn't be saying it. I seem to remember I've read it. Councillor Miles, who's on licensing, may have a view as well. Councillor Miles.
Yeah, just say, I think there where the numbers of, so we've got a private hire, which are those we have those operating from other districts within the city, and then the Hackney carriages. So that in terms of terminology, I think probably what we're most concerned about is around the numbers of private hires. It is difficult for us to restrict those who are licensed from elsewhere, but we do have control over those who are licensed within the city. And I think my understanding of the licensing landscape of these two categories of vehicle is that actually Hackneys we have more control over their pricing and the type of vehicle that they're using, because of the nature of what they can do in terms of what they're allowed to do, which is just pick up anywhere within the rounds of the city, versus the private hire. So I think it's the private hire ones where we have these very large numbers, not just because we've got those who are licensed by ourselves, but those that are licensed by other authorities, but can still serve customers through pre-booking in the city. So I hope that clarifies. Thank you.
Great. Does anyone else have any other comments? Councillor Miles, your hand is still raised, but assuming that's okay. Excellent. In which case, thank you. Thanks loads, Pedro. Really great work. And also Councillor Railton, although I again believe you're staying for the next time. So Pedro, feel free to leave if you wish. We really look forward to the next 5 years. Alice, you may have a comment at this point. Hang on a sec, Pedro.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to double check the formal recommendations that the panel wanted to actually agree. So I think I've got 4. So I've got one around writing to central government about the funding side of things, the plan around when Botley Road reopens, the one that Councillor Miles said about disseminating key messages and display boards, and then the Councillor Hunt's one about the capping the number of vehicle licenses. Are they agreed as formal recommendations?
Yes, could you just add in there the feasibility next year once we know our dates of having a kind of early preview of the report pre at this stage? So
yeah, so I don't think that needs to be a formal recommendation, but I have
Fine.
noted it and I'll follow that up.
Great, thanks, Alice. Great, thank you, Pedro. You are
Thank you all.
appreciated. Great. So I'm now going to move on to item 7, i.e. item 9, the local area energy planning and mitigation measures regarding local grid constraints. That's quite a mouthful. This is a presentation and may I welcome Councillor Railton and Alice Jones to deliver the presentation.
Hi everyone, I'll just share my screen.
Thanks, Alice. We can now see it.
Perfect. Okie doke. So yeah, I've just got a short slide pack to go through today. The first half is going to focus on giving an overview of local area energy plans, or LEAPs as they're otherwise known, going a bit into the process of their creation and why they're becoming so vital to meet local and national net zero ambitions. The second half of the slide deck will then give an update on Oxfordshire's LEAP programme, kind of looking at what progress has been made over the past 15 months, and then a look ahead at the next 2 years as the programme develops. So just to give an overview of local area energy plans, or LEAPs. So LEAPs are an emerging concept and they're a structured process that provide the evidence, guidance and framework to enable the long-term transition to a low carbon energy system. So Energy Systems Catapult UK came up with the concept of LEAPs as there was the shared understanding that decarbonisation activity at the moment is largely uncoordinated. So LEAPs offer a whole systems approach and detail kind of where, when and how action needs to happen within a local area. So they offer a cost-effective whole systems approach. They're locally led plans. And it is important to note that these plans are not currently mandated or funded by central government in any way. And as of May 2024, around 25% of local authorities have or are in the process of creating a local area energy plan. So at their core, LEAPs provide a highly granular place-based plan that shows what needs to be done, where it can be done, and when it can be done. So they demonstrate the chosen pathway to net zero with sequence interventions. So they give short, medium, and long-term measures that need to be implemented. Obviously, our chosen pathway is to 2040. So that's where our local area energy plan will kind of forecast out to. The LEAPs consider the unique characteristics of the local area and the existing energy system. They are fully costed plans and provide a breakdown of investment needed to decarbonise, and they provide an energy and low carbon project pipeline, which are in alignment with local strategies and local policies, so such as the local plan and local infrastructure policies as well. So the right-hand side just gives a bit of detail in the process of creating a LEAP. So I won't spend too long on this one, but I think it's useful to give some context. So the first phase that's involved in preparing a local energy plan is looking at the ambitions of the local area. So for us, our target is 2040 to meet net zero. It's also important to consider how the plan will be used going forward. The second phase is engagement. So this phase includes engagement with major energy users within the city. So for us, that will largely include many of our ZCOP members who will be vital to helping us meet net zero by 2040. The third phase is then mapping out the local area and the existing energy system, and this goes down to a building level. Then the options to decarbonise will be modelled, and the most cost-effective options will be chosen, and obviously the most suitable options. So, for example, decarbonisation of heat is likely going to be answered to by installing heat networks around the city. Projects will then be identified, and their associated timelines will be given, and then the plan will be created. And the plan, like I've mentioned, is really detailed and goes down to the postcode level. So, for example, we'll include how many EV chargers need to be deployed in one postcode area and how much that's going to cost. So a bit of background of why LEAPs are so vital to meeting net zero. So the rapid transition to new forms of energy generation, consumption and technology mean that the current funding regime and electricity network capacity will not be able to keep pace with local and national policy targets without significant change. So if not addressed, this will lead to project delays, exposing communities and businesses to energy supply issues, delaying decarbonisation, reducing economic growth and increasing inequalities. So within Oxford, we are already feeling the effects of grid capacity issues. Some of our housing developments have been affected, and that's particularly prevalent within Oxford as our local policy goes beyond national standards in terms of low carbon technology deployment within housing developments. So number of heat pumps and EV chargers required per dwelling. So a successful LEAP should provide the function of guiding decision-making, prioritising resources and supporting project investment. They should also act as an evidence base for network development plans, which in turn should unlock grid capacity. So if the DNOs are aware of low carbon deployment in certain substation areas prior, then forward investment can be directed. They should also be used as a tool to unlock funding, so understanding where retrofit strategies should be directed, where solar installation will be most successful, gives a solid evidence base to unlock funding. The local area energy plans will link with other key policies, like I've said, so the local plan and also other key policies like the infrastructure strategy. They should also provide transparency in project commitments, so detailing why the project pipelines have been selected and why they offer the most optimal route to net zero. So now I'm going to focus on giving an update on the Oxfordshire LEAP programme. So the Oxfordshire LEAP programme is being led by County Council in collaboration with the 5 districts, and this is under a FOP directive. So the whole programme is due to take 24 months, and it has 2 separate work streams. So the first work stream, which is due to take place over a 12-month period, will focus on delivering 5 individual district level LEAPs and then provide a county-wide summary report. And then the second work stream, which will happen over a 24-month period, will focus on the development of a LEAP function within the districts. So this will support capabilities to navigate issues of grid constraints and then coordinate the net zero project pipelines which come out of the individual level LEAPs. So the Oxfordshire local area energy plans will recommend costed solutions in the form of action plans and a project pipeline with a mix of different options supported by business cases. They will establish a hierarchy of measures that can be implemented in defined spatial areas such as neighbourhoods, and these measures will include things such as heat networks, strategic storage, community microgrids, heat pumps, rooftop solar PV, neighbourhood EV charging hubs. And the plans will also consider the interplay with existing project pipelines and programme commitments and consider cost. They will also work closely with the DNO to understand current network capacity constraints and planned upgrade schedules. So, like I mentioned, the delivery is set to have 2 work streams, but this is going to be carried out over 3 different phases. So the first phase will be done at a county-wide level, and this includes the energy systems catapult stages 1 to 4. Then after stage 4, there will be a stage gate where districts can decide if they would like to stay within the programme and carry on to stages 5 to 7. It's understood at the moment that all districts will continue to carry out the full Oxfordshire Loop programme. So then stages 5 to 7 are where the districts kind of go off to create their individual action plans with the consultant. And this was recommended through market testing, as each different districts have different net zero targets. So it wouldn't make sense for it to be a collective local area energy plan. And then the third stage is all about embedding the LEAP function within the local authorities, so supporting capabilities to navigate grid constraints, etc. So where we are in the programme to date, so over the past sort of 15 months or so, an executive steering board and working group was established last year. And since then, there's been frequent meetings. Early this year, there was extensive market testings done, and this was led by county. And the outcome of this market testing fed into the specification development. The specification was then approved in August and procurement went live shortly after that. The tender will now stay live for 2 months with a planned contract award date in December to get the consultant on board. And then looking ahead to the delivery. So once the consultant's on board, work stream 1 will be delivered over a 12-month period. So stages 1 to 4, which is the county-wide modelling, will be delivered in May 2025. And then the district level LEAPs are planned to be delivered in December of next year. The work stream 2, which is all about embedding the LEAP function, will then be have a long stop date of December 2026. So whilst it's understood that local area energy plans will be the biggest mitigation against grid constraints issues throughout the UK, there are other measures kind of bubbling along in the background. So one of those being the DFES process, which is an annual assessment led by SSEN to understand future energy network demand, which then informs network investments. So this annual process involves each local authority inputting in domestic and non-domestic development plans, and also submitting a local net zero strategy questionnaire, so understanding retrofit strategies, heat decarbonisation, EV deployment, etc. Regen then model scenarios and look at the potential increase of electricity generation, storage and demand that will or connect to the network in the future. City has kind of gone one step further to the formal DFES process this year, and we've chosen to engage major energy users within the city via ZCOP So we've run our own questionnaire, which SSCN and Regen have reviewed, which has gathered data from ZCOP partners looking at their future energy demand profiles and feeding that in to the DFES process. And that's to give SSCN a more kind of robust and evidence-based understanding of future energy demand. A second step or mitigation measure that City have been involved in is an SSCN pilot study, which has tested Lensa. So Lensa is a digital tool which local area energy plans will be modelled on in the future. It's still in its development phase at the moment. So Oxford Council, along with 5 other councils around the UK, have been involved in the pilot study, which has tested the tool's functionality and also improved in-house capabilities. And in the future, this tool will be vital for SSCN to understand when low carbon technology will be deployed. And then the final thing just to note is FOP, or Future Oxford Partnerships, are submitting a lobbying letter at the end of this month, which will outline developments which are being impacted by energy constraints within Oxfordshire, and that's being done jointly with the districts. Yeah, okay. So that is the end of the slide pack, but happy to take questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Alice. It's a big project. Right, I'm going to turn over to the rest of the panel for questions to start with. Just trying to filter through my docs. Has anybody else? Sorry, excellent. Councillor Miles, off you go.
Yeah, it's really a context question. You mentioned that we're more affected by grid constraints in Oxford and the developments we're doing here due to grid capacity issues than other areas, and in part that this is connected to us having tougher requirements, like or putting more focus on renewables. So I just wanted to just clarify why that is the case, because it's sort of counterintuitive. And then the second question is, I understand that separately there's some work on district heat networks that are being done, and how is that going to fit into this LEAP process? Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, the first one, so our building regulations do go beyond national standards in terms of heat pump and EV charging facilities per dwelling, and solar installation as well, which obviously requires a larger electricity connection. So when the developers are going to apply for their connection, because of the measures that they've installed, they're having to apply for a larger connection than if traditional gas boilers and no EV charging was included.
Thank you. That's a really helpful clarification. Thank you.
And the district heat bid that is in at the moment, yes, that will be considered in the LEAP process and be included in the final plan if successful.
Thank you.
I have a question, which is around you mentioned that the LEAP process is voluntary. It's around 25% of local authorities doing it. Why is it not mandated by government? You know, what's the government expect? You know, I don't really understand that it's a voluntary process, because it looks like a pretty necessary and kind of you know, in order to forecast the grid demand nationally. I don't understand how 75% of people aren't doing it. And so how does it fit into, there must be some other framework that's being used to forecast the grid nationally. So how does the LEAP fit into that?
Yeah, in terms of grid forecasting, so the DFES process, which I mentioned, which is an annual process. So that at the moment kind of stands to gather local energy demand profiling. The DFES process then feeds into something called the FES, which is the regional energy projections. And at the moment, Ofgem are creating a RESP function, which is regional, kind of a regional level local area energy plan. But there's the understanding that a level below, so a local area and a LEAP needs to be created, otherwise there's going to be a gap in understanding projects and and going down to the kind of secondary substation level and primary substation level.
Understood. So essentially, we are doing this because although it's not mandated, it is extremely helpful, particularly in a place like us where we are high growth and high intensity, to understand where we are going to need power, because otherwise it's going to be a problem in a few years. So whilst it's not nationally mandated, we should absolutely be doing it, which is why we are doing it. Is that a fair summary?
It's a good.
Mish.
Yes, just to add, and I think it's a very good sort of question as to why they aren't mandated, which they probably should be. But actually, it's also, there are changes which we believe are essential within the way in which the regulatory frameworks are operating as well, that would actually allow the network operators to take a more kind of forward-looking view in terms of what the requirements are going to be. Because at the moment, it is sort of, you book your capacity, and at that point, the network operator is allowed to work up a plan to see how that capacity need can be met. Really, what we've asked for in letters that we've already put through to Ofgem and government on this matter is a kind of a much more sort of forward-looking approach, which makes assumptions that we're clearly going to have a lot more electrical kit. Alice mentioned PVs, electric vehicles, heat pumps, etc. All of it basically means we need more, more robust electrical systems to be able to operate all this stuff, and we shouldn't have to wait for getting investments made in the way that they currently are. So that is hand in hand with the LEAP process is also needed.
Understood. And I guess at a smaller level, this will, if we have solar farms or whatever, then we will link them through to where the demand is going to be in the future, rather than like what happened yesterday, which is, yes. Okay. Understood. I sort of understood the point of them, but I now see that, it's clear, it's granular, it's future led rather than the current approach, which sounds as if the grid may have some issues, which I already knew about. Councillor Miles.
Yeah, Mish, you just mentioned that the council's already asked Ofgem and central government for this forward-looking regulatory approach. When were these letters sent? And is it that they were sent to the old government as opposed to the new government? And just to make sure that message is really heard loud and clear by central government. Thank you.
Yes. Now the letters to Ofgem, I think, was last year, because they actually had a regulatory review and asked for evidence. There was also a submission made to one of the all-party groups, which did an investigation, parliamentary, that is, investigation into this, which we submitted to, and I think that was last year as well. And we wrote to government. We have written to government about this subsequent to the general election, as well as prior to it. And then, as Alice has highlighted, there's a kind of a more detailed letter on actions that we want to see, which is going to be put in sort of on behalf of all the councils. This is critical stuff for Oxfordshire.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any final comments from the panelists? And then do we have any recommendations? It sounds like we actually don't, other than this has been very informative. And as Councillor Miles has just recommended, that we, emphasise this importance to the future government, but it sounds like that is already in place, so probably doesn't need to be part of an official recommendation. Do any other panelists have any other comments? And if not, does everyone agree that there are no recommendations on this other than the informal one, or there are no formal recommendations from this item? Sorry, guys. Brilliant. Thank you, Alice.
Thanks.
And honestly, it looks really important and great work. So, well done. Hopefully this will future-proof us eventually. Great. So I am going to move on to item 8/item 10, and I am exactly on time. And this is the ZCOP expansion. So I'd like to welcome Councillor Elton again and Mish to introduce the report.
Yes, shall I kick off then? ZCOP, I think we have talked about the Zero Carbon Oxford Partnership to the panel previously. So I don't think I need to say a lot about where it started. I think that it's important to note that it was one of the early such partnerships that was established around it, as far as we were aware. When we created it, we looked at Greater Manchester, which had already put something similar to this in place. We think it's been really successful, and I think actually Alice's presentation just now provided a really useful example of how ZCOP is being used to sort of shape the way in which we address the climate change issue in Oxford, with the involvement of ZCOP members in developing a more granular LEAP here in the city than where they're at elsewhere. And we've also been very successful in securing government funding and other funding for individual projects that have been run by ZCOP within the city. So it's sort of got to the inevitable point whereby we needed to sort of look beyond just what was being delivered within the city itself, and what opportunity there might be to expand ZCOP into a county-wide body. And that's not least partly because many of the things that we've been focused on within the city, for example, retrofit of housing, is just as applicable everywhere else. And so why shouldn't the learnings from ZCOP be used elsewhere? But equally, it's also because some of the sort of areas of focus that we've had, and I'll give you an example, wind energy, and we did a piece of work on renewable onshore wind. It's pretty obvious we're not going to be putting up large-scale onshore wind in Oxford. It wouldn't work. It wouldn't be there wouldn't be anywhere sort of obvious to site it. So we do need to engage with councils outside the city where it would make more sense. That's clearly equally the case with any sort of large scale PV. And so as the sort of the rest of the county in a sense has began to catch up with us, and they've now got a net zero roadmap for the rest of Oxfordshire, which obviously goes to a different date, but it's got effectively many of the sort of same or similar actions that we'd already identified in our 2040 roadmap. We've been in sort of further discussions with colleagues in the other councils, but also actually with some of the stakeholders that were interested in ZCOP but weren't Oxford based. I can mention a couple. They're not named in the report, but I don't think that they'd be upset. So Blenheim Estate, for example, has approached us. Lister Village has approached us. As you can imagine, both are sort of large organisations which are responsible for a lot of carbon emissions and are interested to see how they can work with other partners to sort of get to net zero. And the sort of coincidence of a decision which has now been taken by FOP to create local area energy plans, and an agreement by the county-wide chief execs to expand ZCOP and enable us to approach other organisations outside of the city, means that we're sort of in the process now of fully changing its governance such that it will become a county-wide body. Councillor Brown, a council leader who had been chairing ZCOP for the last couple of years, has already now stood down as the chair. Harriet Waters, who is essentially the head of climate change work at Oxford University, has been elected as the new chair of ZCOP. And we are in the process of an expansion programme which should enable not just the large organisations, and I named a couple outside of Oxford, and there'll be many, many more in all parts of Oxfordshire who we can get on board. But we're also interested in, for example, working with organisations like the farmers representatives. Again, not something which we've hugely focused on within the city of Oxford, but which is absolutely land use. Farming is really important from a climate change perspective outside the city. We're also going to expand our focus around small businesses, working in particular with Low Carbon Hub, to see how we can increase the amount of engagement on retrofit by small businesses. And we will create effectively a sort of more community based wing for ZCOP as well, for the expanded Oxfordshire organisation, because whilst we consciously excluded community groups when we created ZCOP within the city, and that was really, frankly, to create the space for the polluters, if I could describe us as that, the large organisations, to actually have good and sort of frank discussions. We think that things have evolved now, and that we're in a position now to engage more actively with community groups. And there are, of course, the established community action groups across the county, as well as community energy groups as well. So there are lots and lots of opportunities for this expanded partnership to essentially to help coordinate action on all those different fronts.
Great, thank you. I have a question first. So essentially, expanding ZCOP, making more district councils plus the county involved on that side, and then making it more open to other large employers outside the city, and then expanding also potentially to other types of institutions such as community groups. So kind of expanding along 3 axes. I think it looks like you've thought through a lot of the kind of implications of that in terms of, well, there's already quite a lot of, close engagement. Will it water that down? How could we structure it, having specific sectors or specific, pricing for smaller organizations, or like whatever? How do we keep it focused so that it remains useful for the people that are big and involved so far? So that all looks good. My question though is, how do our zero carbon goals or net zero goals in terms of timeline match up with the other DCs and the county? And is there a chance that we'll water down ZCOP ambitions by including other people, essentially? Because I don't think that's covered in this report. Did that question make sense?
No, very much. So I think the first thing to say is that you've got an Oxford carbon roadmap to 2040.
Yeah,
net zero roadmap, and you've got an Oxfordshire net zero roadmap to 2050.
That's what I thought. Yeah,
you've also got district councils which have variously got other targets too. So Charlwell's target is currently 2030. I think it's fair to say they're probably not going to get net zero Charlwell by 2030, and all of the districts the other districts, I should say, are currently reviewing their own net zero targets. I think, and we have looked at this. We think that certainly for the next decade, and in terms of really developing many of the actual sort of areas of which are going to be critical to be able to deliver net zero, either to 2040 or to 2050, and LEAPS is a perfect example of that. And
yes,
then things like heat networks, which might flow from LEAPS. I think that they're common to all of these. They would be common within either an Oxford ZCOP, or if, let's just say, instead we'd had 5 ZCOPs created across the county, which was very, very briefly considered, and then the main sort of players said, no, we don't want to go to 5 meetings, thank you. So we think that actually there is a lot of confluence really of the work that needs to be done, despite those different timelines that you might have. But we've we're certainly clear that as far as Oxford's concerned, we're not going to change our 2040 timeline, and that we will sort of continue to report on progress around our sort of 2040 sort of roadmap and where we are at with emissions, with a view to actually sort of achieving that particular outcome. And things like the local plan and other measures will take account of the fact. And I think, as Alice has actually already highlighted as well, that the leaps themselves will take account of the actual dates that each local authority area, each district level area has chosen for its net zero date.
Good. My second question is just around if we are, how proactive, and this may not be relevant to this, but it feels like we've sort of got everybody that's big in Oxford involved in some capacity. Is there a concern that with dilution, we might miss people that don't necessarily want to sign up to this? Or I don't mean in Oxford, I mean in Oxfordshire. How do we make sure we get everybody from that's really significant carbon contributor from Oxfordshire involved in the expanded ZCOP, if that makes sense? If there are particularly industries, there may be industries that don't want to sign up. How do we kind of, is it going to be possible to encourage those people to join, those organisations to join a larger partnership, whereas it might be easier to get them to join a smaller partnership? Again, did that make sense? Have we considered that? I'm sure you have.
Yes, I mean, the honest answer is that I guess we don't really know. We have to go and take soundings. So we've spoken to some prospective organisations, and unsurprisingly, you know, I've named two
that are very proactive on this.
They're proactive in this space. Yeah. They've approached us. We've started approaches to others, and we'll kind of see how it goes. I think that the coincidence of the timeframes of the LEAP work with the ZCOP expansion are very helpful in this respect.
Yes, agreed.
We're able to say to people, look, you're going to have to talk collectively.
Do you want some electricity in the future? Come and talk to us. By the way, yeah, we
can help coordinate that, and we can make your life easier for you under the ZCOP umbrella. I think that also, you know, there are, of course, for any organisation, let's just take a company, a private company. It could be a manufacturing company, it could be another sort of company. It too eventually has got to take account of the requirements that government has placed on all organisations. And so even if in 2024 they haven't considered ZCOP or an expanded ZCOP as being that central to what they're doing, I anticipate the increasing focus which the new government is, certainly its manifesto suggests it's going to be placing in this area, may make more organisations feel that actually getting some assistance, i.e. collective and shared knowledge in this is a sensible thing to do.
Understood. Understood. And yes, and also, you know, you've talked about restructuring the subscription model to encourage smaller organizations to join, you know, again, yes, understood that they may not be joining as early on unless they're in retail businesses or focused businesses. But yeah, in the end, you are completely correct. Okay, excellent. Those are my questions. I will go over to Councillor Miles.
Yeah, it's a clarification. I understand, again, I'm supportive of this expansion, but just want to clarify. So since the members of those that are based in and around the city and in turn would be based in and around the county, would there be a membership category or a way of engaging those that are contributors through supply chain impacts in the city? I'm thinking that may not have their headquarters or base within Oxfordshire. And I don't know, but just where they're located, but there are certain suppliers to the university, for instance, in the hospitality sector, in the cleaning sector, that you see these catering vehicles and cleaning vehicles doing linens for the colleges, and also for many of the private schools, which are in my ward, for instance. And are they brought into this, even if they're not headquartered or have formal officers in the county, because they still need to be engaged, and therefore should there be some kind of membership category to seek an engagement from them. And then secondly, I guess my thinking is from a sector specific perspective, I would like to see there is engagement with the hospitality and tourism sector, because of that being a big sector for us as a city, but also the fact that some of our the existing members also do provide hospitality accommodation outside university term time as well, for instance. So there's some impacts related to that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think a good example of an organisation which is already a member of ZCOM and is definitely not headquartered, or it doesn't actually have any kind of office-based footprint in our city, would be Scottish and Southern Energy Networks. They are a critical member, and they've been a very active and useful member. We'd like to get the Scottish Gas Networks involved as well. They're not currently a member, but I think any organisation that has operations, an operational footprint or operational impact within the county should be sort of considered, and absolutely. So that could include, of course, some of the types of suppliers that you've referenced. I mean, it may well be that, it's interesting that we've seen, not necessarily directly through ZCOP, but we've had good engagement from organisations like, for example, Royal Mail, in respect of electric vehicles, who've been very interested in what the council has done with EV charging and of course the zero emission zone, and have wanted to have conversations about how they can use this part of the world to pilot approaches with vehicles. DPD, we've had similar discussions and so on. So I think that there is an opportunity for some national level organisations, if they see things that are happening here in Oxfordshire, that yes, absolutely, we could get their involvement. And I agree with you that hospitality and tourism, and particularly West Oxfordshire District Council, is a strong supporter and endorser, clearly, of this expansion, and has certainly engaged in it. And for them, it's particularly important as a sector for their economy. So,
thank you.
Sorry, I realised I'm on mute. Apologies. Does anyone else have any other questions? Great. So I suppose there's no. Does anyone have any recommendations?
So, yes. I mean, just if I may, I wonder whether there is a need for this recommendation around those who have an operational footprint in the county but may not be headquartered there, whether that needs to be some kind of formal recommendation. I mean, I think we heard from Mish that this seemed like a good idea, sort of engaging with national organisations, so ensuring that there is a mechanism by which they can engage if they do have the significant operational footprint in the county, but that might be out of scope of what we're being asked to recommend on this. But I think we're endorsing this proposal. Thank you.
Great. So sorry, actually, do we need to establish, Alice, is that or Mish, is that a formal recommendation that we need to make, or was it just a kind of an informal recommendation that you'll take forwards?
I'm happy to do either. I think it's a good. It is something that we should look at further. I mentioned an example where it already is the case, but I think there probably will be other.
Let's make it a formal recommendation to consider it, rather than to, absolutely deliver it 100%, because we know that it needs to be considered. We don't know how feasible it is at this stage. So yes, please, Alice, formal recommendation to consider. Great. I am going to move on now to the Climate and Environment Panel Work Plan. So sorry, thank you, Councillor Elton and Mish, for attending. I'm not going to move on until you are offered the opportunity to leave. You are welcome to stay or go as you like. Alice, I've missed something. Over to you.
I was just going to ask Mish if he could do the update on the climate adaptation stuff that the county was doing from earlier. It's just a matter arising from the previous meeting.
Oh, yes, good point.
Yes, absolutely happy to do that. So so just to be clear, climate adaptation strategy is being developed it's being led by the County Council, and I have an update from them which I will read from. So they and this is from Tom Lizell there, who is the officer who's leading the work on adaptation. He reports that Sustainability West Midlands were commissioned at the start of May 24 to develop the Oxfordshire Climate Adaptation Route Map. This is an organisation with a lot of experience working in terms of developing their own strategy in the West Midlands, and it was felt that they would be well placed to sort of help take the work forward here. Since the start of May, they've held workshops with stakeholders, building awareness and understanding on adaptation. There was an in-person workshop at the town hall, which explained how the route map is being developed. And Tom reports that there's been a further 20 one-to-one interviews with key stakeholders on relevant work streams. So it's very much a project which is kind of underway now. In addition, he tells us that a survey has been circulated to a wider range of different stakeholders that seeking further input. So it's they're expecting to be able to circulate an initial draft of the route map around the end of this month, and then it's expected that a final approval of the route map will be going through FOP around January 25. So there should be a document that members and all of us can look at sometime later this month.
Great, thank you. And now we will move on, unless I've missed anything else. Perfect. Thank you, as always, Alice. It's extremely helpful to have you keeping me on track. Great. So we are now going to move to the Climate and Environment Panel Work Plan. That's item 5 in the agenda pack, but it's obviously item 9 now. Alice, could I get you to introduce this item, which we are obviously all familiar with, but just if you could introduce it, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so as you said, the work plan's included in the agenda pack. All of the meetings have items against them. The March meeting is probably the one with the least items, that there's a little bit of scope to have some extra things potentially, depending on capacity and other things. I don't think much has changed actually since the last time the panel viewed the work plan. So the panel's just asked to agree it either as set out in the agenda pack or with any amendments. And I think I referenced previously that I'm still chasing up on the items requested on loss and damage and the energy efficiency and repurposing council car parks one. So I'll continue to follow up on those and leave a note for my successor as well.
Great. I'm just looking through it again. Great. I'm sorry. Sorry, I got distracted then by looking at it. Councillor Miles.
Yeah, I think on the point that Alice, you've just mentioned around the council car parks, it was referenced previously that this would connect to the asset management strategy potentially, and just given the need, just the timetable for that with the next budget round, I'm wondering whether there is a need to look at that at a meeting before the end of this year. So it's more in your following up on that. Is this something then that is going to be part of that budget process, and should we therefore, if it is, be looking at it before December so that we can bring forward recommendations for the next budget round? Thank you. Where these sorts of documents are in parallel sort of agreed and looked at. I understood it correct. Thank you.
Alice, over to you.
Yeah, so just to come back on that, that's fine. I can ask the question when I follow up on it, and if it is related to the budget round and everything, then yeah, absolutely.
Great. Any other questions on this item? Great. So I'm going to move to item 6 in the agenda pack, item 10, the report back on the recommendations. Yes, so we highlighted these at the beginning. Does anyone have any comments or questions on the responses to the recommendations or on the recommendation tracker? Excellent. So can we note the responses? I suppose we just need to officially note that the responses have been made and that the recommendation tracker exists, and we note it. Good. So dates of future meetings then. So now I've lost this. Sorry, where is this date? What page is it on? Sorry, everyone.
20th of November.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, great. And then the 26th of February. The 20th of November, does the return to the normal time of 6 o'clock work for everybody? Do people prefer 5? Any thoughts? Ideally, we will stay at 6 o'clock on the 20th of November, but if you cannot make that, please let us know now. Marvellous. I'm going to assume that the whole panel can make that. So I will see you, we will see everybody, all of us will see each other on the 20th of November at 6 p.m. Great. Is there anything else we need to discuss today before I close? Marvellous. Thank you, everyone, as always, for making the time. We finished a bit early. Alice, we will miss you. Thank you. We hope that there will be a replacement by the 20th of November at least, but we really wish you the best in your future endeavours. You've really helped run this meeting effectively and use people's time well. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Alice.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. We'll miss you.
We will.
Yes, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evenings. Cheers.